Momentum is building in Utah to expand Medicaid. This is unusual. This is a red state that has been refusing Medicaid expansion for a while, but it is now joining the ranks of Nebraska and Idaho to maybe expand Medicaid to its population. We're going to talk about some attempts they have tried in the past to do this, but we're going to talk about why this attempt is different. So this is a conservative state. It's going to have Medicaid expansion on the November ballot. Now, Medicaid expansion in Utah would cover an additional 150,000 people, but it would also bring big money into the state, about $800 million a year from the feds. So that's a big incentive to have an infusion of money into the state to offset some of that cost of Medicaid expansion that then frees up state money to be used for other things. There will be a state contribution attached, and we'll talk about that in a second. But like we said, there are other red states that are considering Medicaid expansion as well. But this isn't new. There have been red states from the start that have wanted Medicaid expansion. And we look at Chris Christie and Jan Brewer in Arizona, governors that wanted the money and took it very early. There are just a few red states left that have been arguing about whether they want to have any impact of Obamacare in their state. Well, Utah has been changing its mind. They see the impact of covering 150,000 more people. Medicaid eligibility in Utah right now is quite low, federal poverty level wise. They would have the opportunity to bump that eligibility up to 138% of the federal poverty level. That's a lot of people that would be covered in that. And then if you have the infusion of money to go along with to help make that possible, it's looking like a win-win. Now, the quote that we're carrying through this as our little theme for this presentation is, there was a quote coming out of the governor's office and policy folks in Utah saying, hey, if it can win here, it can happen anywhere. So it's up to you, Utah, to make this happen. The status right now, cautiously optimistic. Opinion polls are saying about 60% of people in Utah are favoring Medicaid expansion. The funding mechanism is what is kind of turning some heads. The feds would pay at least 90% for newly eligible beneficiaries. Like we said, that's about $800 million a year. The state share is about $90 million a year, which is a lot, but they propose doing that with a sales tax rate increase. A small percentage, 0.15% sales tax increase could generate their $90 million that they need to make up the difference. Now, like we said, they've tried Medicaid expansion in different ways in the past in Utah. This was actually a state law that was signed by the governor, went through the legislature, was approved, signed by the governor, had to go to Washington to be approved by the feds, and the feds said, no, we're not going to approve any partial Medicaid expansions until after the midterm elections. So they're showing their political hands and their motivation there. What they wanted to do with partial expansion was expand Medicaid up to 100% of the federal poverty level, but do it with work requirements. They had a couple other strings attached along the way. The governor signed it into law, and then it sat. So now there's been this grassroots movement to put it on the ballot as a full Medicaid expansion. And now voters in November are going to decide if that's going to happen. You can read the ballot initiative in its full. You can read that online. You can also read a couple opinion pieces and some articles about that grassroots support and how it's coming from a lot of unlikely sources, but people that agree that the impact, both people and money-wise, is too hard to pass up. If you have questions about Medicaid expansion or other affordable care topics, you can send them to us, and you could do that at healthwatchwisconsin.org.